I've been talking quite a bit recently about seeing, and how seeing as an organised sensory activity plays itself out as a metaphor within knowledge, particularly in relation to something like belief, where I've suggested that one of the ways in which you understand believing is through a metaphorical mapping, where we understand believing in terms of seeing, reversing the seeing as believing idiom. But what I think I need to do for myself, really, to think through that a bit more in a bit more detail, is to really to flesh out what seeing is like, really, what the kind of phenomenology of seeing is. And one of the aspects I've just been thinking about is in terms of, and this is going to sound so obvious, I feel a bit stupid saying it, but it's about how seeing operates in terms of just the architecture of the body. You know, the eyes are at the top of the body, they're at the top of the head, quite near the top of the head. There's not much north of the eyes, really. All the other stuff is below the eyes. I'm just wondering what the implications of that architectural layout are for how we understand seeing, and how seeing, as I say, is used metaphorically. I mean, certainly one of the things I notice is that if I take my attention away from seeing and place it on another sense, particularly on the felt sense, you know, if I focus on if I kind of intercept and go inside feel myself going inside my body to feel what my body feels like, or focus on my proprioceptive sense, or think about my balance, any of the kind of components of the felt sense. In addition to that being, to me, feeling that as a kind of move towards the interior, it also feels like a movement south, which I guess it completely literally is. There's nothing, again, nothing metaphysical about that. You know, I do feel as if I'm placing my attention, lowering the focus of my attention, and sending it down into my body. And since that's happening, what I'm assuming is happening there alongside that is that movement downwards in terms of my re-engagement of other senses is kind of picking up associations and inferences to do with what it means to go down. And I have spoken about this downness before, particularly with reference to James Hillman's book, The Dream and the Underworld, which is really great on the kind of poetic understanding of what we mean by down or under or beneath. So when I send my attention to a sense which is other than visual, particularly, as I say, the felt sense, it's a movement downwards and it's picking up other inferences. So I can feel that movement downwards is also associating with, for example, a movement away from the light and towards the darkness, because we do have an organised relationship to light and dark, in which, you know, the sun is generally up and the darkness is generally down. And so I think that consistency is forming part of my experience, or is inflecting my experience of changing my sensory attention. It's also a movement towards the ground, and I think, again, there are inferences being picked up there to do with the ground as a place where growing things start. You know, the kind of ground of all being, in metaphorical terms, I think, belongs to that kind of completely physical, completely material understanding of ground as a place where life seems to start and where life seems to emerge from. And indeed the reverse of that, which is to do where life terminates. Movements towards the ground is also a movement towards the darkness of death. So I think we do have that association with ground, but it has that kind of it is that kind of place of eternal return and eternal renewal. That's sounding terribly mythological. I don't really mean it in that sense, but I'm just meaning in terms of this is where the grass grows, this is where animals scurry about and worms live, and that's where dead bodies go. So it's, in a sense, I'm trying to keep it nuts and bolts. But when you send your senses downwards, you're heading in that direction, and I think it's picking up some of the inferences of that as well. What else about that? I think it's also moving away from a kind of subjective knowledge. Actually, that's not true. No, I think it's moving away from a kind of objective knowledge towards a kind of subjective knowledge. The visual is very open source as a sensory mode. If I'm looking at something and someone stands near me, they can probably see it as well. But no matter how close someone stands to me, they will not feel what I am feeling. They don't have access to the interior sensations of my body. So I think movement downwards, is also a movement away from the public and towards the personal. So again, I think that's figuring within that move. And conversely, I think movement towards seeing, taking attention away from the haptic, the felt, the interior, and towards the visual, is quite literally a move towards the personal, away or towards the external, towards those other inferences that are associated with light and release of weight, all those kind of things that moving upwards picks up. So I think vision associates with those things, whereas absence of vision or movements towards the felt in moving down picks up the inferences of the down. And one of the ways I think that plays itself out, and this is really tentative, is to do with out-of-body experiences. Out-of-body experiences, as far as I'm aware, and I'm not claiming to be an expert in this, tend to be visual experiences. I don't know of anybody who has an out-of-body experience in which they feel an itch somewhere else in the world, or in which they experience something auditory as if they're standing in another place, or smell something and that smell locates them at another point in space. It's always visual. Out-of-body experiences are ultimately visual experiences, and they also correlate, I think, with a lot of the literature around spirituality and that kind of astral travelling, all that kind of stuff, are again primarily visual experiences. So when I imagine, if I was to imagine, I don't really believe this, but if I was to imagine my spirit leaving my body at death, I would imagine that being a visual experience. I would imagine looking down on my body and then moving towards the light and merging with the greater light. Those are the kind of things I would poetically imagine happening. I would not imagine my vision staying where it is and my felt sense expanding and becoming part of some sort of greater felt sense. I don't think that would happen. So again, I think that's something that's happening with that. And just the last thing I want to say in terms of this height and sensory correlation, the fact that vision is associated with the top of the body and the height of that, whereas things like the felt sense are associated with lower down, is in kind of metaphysical systems like Augustine and like Kierkegaard. Augustine talks about the corporeal knowing or corporeal seeing, I can't remember what he says now, in which, or corporeal thought, in which it's low down, it's of the body, whereas spiritual and intellectual thought is higher up, and he places that quite close to not only the brain where the thinking takes place, but also up to the eyes, I think. And I think you find it in Kierkegaard, although he plays it out in very different terms, in terms of the ethical and the religious. But again, it's I think there's something highly visual going on there, or a move towards a sense which is, in Kierkegaard, of the aesthetic of the body and of the senses, of the felt senses, of the subjective and sexual and sensual engagements, towards the public, the ethical, and the religious, which, as I say, I think has this highly visual component to it, or has the kind of structure that vision has.